Hello and welcome to another episode of Thick Slices and Deep Cuts. On tonight's episode, this is going to be the longest title I've ever done for a show. It's a 3-pack number 10, it's a Radio Giants number 10, it's MTV Giants, it's hair metal, it's Halloween, it's all those things. I'm going to be doing 3 hair metal bands tonight in honor of Halloween. This really should just be called the Halloween MTV Giants, but I'm going to be doing, as you can hear, 3 bands: MOTLEY CRUE, then I'm going to be doing RATT, and I'll finish it off with DOKKEN. So let's just get rolling. And this is not a Halloween costume, this is how I really am. I've suddenly got 2 tattoo sleeves, I've always had these gloves, you know, my hair grows fast sometimes, you know. So let's get into it. We're listening to MOTLEY CRUE right now. As part of this Radio Giants series, I talk about bands that I liked as a kid, and MOTLEY CRUE, well, all 3 of these bands totally fit that description of bands I liked even before I was a teenager, because that's just kind of what was going on MTV back in the 80s. And one of the first bands I got into was MOTLEY CRUE. There's the cassette Shout at the Devil, still my favorite album from them. When I was a kid, another kid in my classroom in grade school came in with the vinyl, and it was black and it had that embossed pentagram. And I can't find that anywhere, but I guess he had an older brother, and that's how he always got into music. Somebody had an older brother. So he borrowed his older brother's vinyl and had a gatefold, and on the inside were these guys, pretty much a shot like this, but all 4 together. And on the cover was all black and a pentagram. And I remember looking at that in like 2nd or 3rd grade, just being like, no way. But I always thought this is MOTLEY CRUE's most darkest, heaviest, most metal album. You know, in the beginning, goes into Shout at the Devil, Looks to Kill is great. I remember they had videos for all that, but they had Too Young to Fall in Love, which is a cool video. They're running through Chinatown and all that stuff. But also had a cover of Helter Skelter, Red Hot, Bastard, all these songs. So I always thought, as far as MOTLEY CRUE goes, I don't know if they really ever made classic albums. They had good songs, but this is a pretty strong album. There's one later in their career that people would say is pretty strong, but you know, this is coming off their first album that I think was released in '81 on some label. Ended up being released like in '82 on a bigger label, probably Elektra at that point. And that had Livewire and a song we're about to get to, the title track, Too Fast for Love. It's pretty raw, but it's heavy. For '81, '82, you know, this is pre-hair metal. But, you know, it has to start somewhere. And these guys are also, by the way, on the Sunset Strip, LA. The Sunset Strip, all 3 of these bands, by the way. Just think of that as your backdrop. And Piece of Your Action from the first album, Too Fast for Love. Probably my other go-to album for MOTLEY CRUE. It's really just those first 2. The early ones to me are the best. This one's got good energy. You can tell that they're a hungry band. I think they polish it off here. But then, you know, by '85, for their 3rd album, I feel like MOTLEY CRUE sets the trend. Whatever they do seems to make all the bands follow. And on their 3rd album in '85, Theater of Pain, on cassette, they kind of changed their look a little, and you can't see it on that photo, but they're looking more and more like women. They're wearing pink spandex, and I feel like '85 was the breakout year for glam, for hair metal. They had that look kind of figured out by '85. I think before that, these bands were still kind of like metal, like hard rock and metal, and they kind of had that look going, but it was still pretty rough around the edges. It was more like jean jackets, and the hair wasn't quite as crazy, and they didn't quite look like women yet. But man, by '85, it was in full force. And I feel like MOTLEY CRUE were the first to get there. And then, like, you know, bands that we'll talk about here in a sec, they followed suit the same year. I think band like Poison comes up the next year, and they completely look this part, and they didn't even get going until '86 with a release. But I think MOTLEY CRUE influenced the look of the scene, They were probably the most successful band in this scene. There may be somebody I'm forgetting. Poison. I don't know. Anyway, I feel like they were the trendsetters, good, bad, or otherwise. This album, by the way, is pretty lackluster. If you like Home Sweet Home, great. Smoking in the Boys' Room, that's a cover. I always like Use It or Lose It. Tonight. I Need a Lover Tonight. Save Our Souls is pretty good. Raise Your Hands to Rock. I don't think anything on here is terrible, but nothing's great here. It's kind of a placeholder album. I mean, the most influential thing about this album was that it just changed the look of all these Sunset Strip glam rock hair metal bands. And MTV had a lot to do with that too. I think this was primetime MTV for the 80s. These guys, who needs the radio when you can just do videos on cable TV? So that was their third album. Then after that, I used to have Girls, Girls, Girls on vinyl. I sold it because really the only two songs I really ever liked on that were Wild Side and the title track, and I loved that video when I was a kid, where they're driving around on motorcycles and going into strip clubs. And I'm not even a teenager, but I'm just watching it going, there's something here that's just pulling me in. And so those two songs are on here. I think there are a couple other songs on that album, but basically the highlights are here. Same thing with Theater of Pain. You got Home Sweet Home. They say it's a remix, but it sure sounds like Vince Neil redid his vocals on that. Also, it's got Piece of Your Action and Livewire on here from the first album. One album I used to have too that's got a couple of songs on here, the title track and Kickstart My Heart, is the next album in '89. They do Dr. Feelgood. And I think that album is probably the most mature work they did back in the day. And Bob Rock was brought in to produce. He'd been working with Winger, and he worked with Motley Crue on Dr. Feelgood, and I think that was their big seller, and had a lot of videos, well produced, kind of heavier. You took them a little bit more seriously at that point, but as we get a pause in the action here. But I don't know. That album never quite clicked with me, and I think the other problem was it came out in '89, and by '89 I just had moved out of this. I was a teenager, but by '89, just kind of moved up into the next level, which was, Iron Maiden and thrash and everything that was, a little bit heavier than this. But here's the song Primal Scream that you can only find, well, I'm sure you can find it on other things, but at the time you could only find it on the Greatest Hits Decade of Decadence, 81 to 91. I always thought this was a cool song, and this didn't come out until 91, which literally was the end of this scene. Grunge hit late 91, and by New Year's Day 92, this stuff was kind of out. But these guys were there in the beginning. 81, that's the dawn of this scene. They literally covered 81 to 91. They literally covered all the years you could cover and be cool with this type of music. So I do like Primal Scream. There are a couple other tracks on this Greatest Hits that are new. But I would just say that, as a kid, the first thing I heard from them was Shout at the Devil, Looks That Kill, stuff like that. Thought it was awesome. When you're 7 or 8, this was like the heaviest. I remember I had Shout at the Devil and Ozzy's Bark at the Moon. And they were my heaviest albums. I thought they were heavier than AC/DC or Van Halen or Def Leppard, or at least darker with the imagery. I guess Too Fast for Love, the debut, would have been my second favorite. After that, it's hard to tell. It's probably Dr. Feelgood, then Girls, 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 then Theater of Pain. Or just go ahead and get this Decade of Decadence. Covers a lot of good stuff too. But, then 91, then you're on the other side of 91, this stuff's out, so what does Motley Crue do? I'm not sure if Vince quit or if they kicked Vince Neil out, but they go get John Corabi, and they put out an album self-titled in 94, which sheds all of that hair metal in favor of just big, heavy riffing rock. And I think it's okay, but it's still not totally memorable. It's probably more respectable something they've done in the last 10 years, but I don't know, it's not as memorable, and that was a one and done, and I honestly couldn't tell you a song they've made since. I know Tommy Lee kind of does different styles of music here and there, and I'm sure Nikki Sixx has done at least 6 a.m. I'm sure he's done a few projects. I know Mick Mars is working on a solo album he's been working on forever. He's a pretty good guitar player. So yeah, that's Motley Crue. One of their keys to success too is pretty much keeping the same band lineup. You know, aside from the one album, they've had the same 4 guys since the beginning. That's going 40 years and on. So there you go. So that's wrapping up my first band tonight. We'll leave with a Mick Mars solo. So we will be right back with our second band of the night. Okay, and we're back. Second band of the night. We're talking about RATT. We're talking about RATT. And we're talking about In Your Direction from the classic Out of the Cellar. I do enjoy this album quite a bit. Got it on vinyl. Their best album. It was their first album. Although they did have an EP in '83 that came out even before this, but they formed way back when too. They were another Sunset Strip band. Started out in San Diego. Jakey Lee was their guitarist before the great Warren DeMartini arrived. By the way, one of the reasons I like these bands is because they all have good guitar players. Warren DeMartini's great. And Piercy does the music justice, but this album is just every song. I remember as a kid, every song, you got Wanted Man, You're in Trouble, Round and Round. I mean, who doesn't know Round and Round? And the video's classic. Again, another MTV classic band. The band falls through the ceiling at the big mansion where Milton Berle is, and they're jamming out on the table in front of the dinner guests. In Your Direction, She Wants Money, Lack of Communication was cool, Back for More, The Morning After, I'm Insane, and Scene of the Crime. 10 for 10 on songs. Love this album. In Your Direction. I loved this album cover as a kid. Maybe I should get it on vinyl, but their second full length from '85, Invasion of Your Privacy. I always loved that album cover. But again, if you watch the videos for Lay It Down and You're in Love, they've got the pink spandex thing going on suddenly. It's '85. I think Motley Crue set the tone. These guys followed suit immediately, which was smart. But my problem with this album and listening to it again, Never Use Love, is that you've got two, whereas this was like 10 for 10 on tracks, you've got the follow-up and it's got like these 2 strong songs, You're in Love and Lay It Down. And the rest of the album is okay at best. There's nothing really great outside of those 2 of 10 tracks. So they were notorious, in my opinion, for putting out these albums where they would give you the 10 songs. 2 of them would be great, maybe even 3. But the rest of the album just felt like filler. And that's how it feels here. Beau Hill was the producer during this time. I remember seeing a VH1 behind the scenes on RATT. It would make me laugh. They were good they were good musicians, but they just partied so much. So I always thought this album had a couple of classics, but not necessarily a ton more than that. And speaking of decade of decadence for Motley Crue, 81 to 91, this is the same thing. RATT, 81 to 91. They were perfectly maximizing out that time in this scene. 81 is when it sort of, I guess, started on the Sunset Strip, and I think these bands started to break out a little bit after that. I think Motley Crue literally was the first one to get there. I think the band I'm going to talk about next may have technically gotten there, but they had to re-release those first albums that came out so early. I think it was the success they would have had by '83 that kind of... There's Lay It Down from here. Great guitar tone. I mean, Warren DeMartini's a great guitar player. So anyway, this Greatest Hits is a really good compilation because if you don't want this album, you've got You're in Love and Lay It Down on here. You can't put enough tracks from Out of the Cellar on here. It's all Greatest Hits. In fact, that would be my idea for RATT, is just, if you had an 80-minute CD, if anybody does that anymore, just put this whole album on there and then just take the highlights for the other half of the compilation. But the cool thing about this is you've got 2 tracks from that early EP from '83, and that EP is kind of hard to find. Then they got into '91, they did a song, Nobody Rides for Free from Point Break from '91. They got 5 tracks from Detonator from '90, which I'd never, outside of listening to these tracks, I've never listened to that album in full. You know, you've got 3 from Dancing Undercover, so that came out in '86, another Beau Hill production. I can't say I'm a huge fan of that album either. It just seems like another kind of like, here are a few songs, but there's a lot of filler. You know, you got Slip of the Lip, I guess that's good. Dance. You know, Body Talk. There might be one other. It's not terrible, but I don't. It's just like this album started them out great. This one was a lot of filler, but still some strong stuff. You're still on board with the band. And then by Dancing Undercover, it was like, okay, they're really filling up these albums with some filler. Then you get in '88, you get to Reach for the Sky, another Beau Hill production. And you got Way Cool Jr. I always thought that song was really cool. It was like them really stretching out, doing something new, doing something different. What was the other? I Want a Woman. And it's okay. I think that album sounds, for the filler or some of the songs that you don't remember as well, I thought it sounded better than Dancing Undercover. This is a great solo that Warren drops in. So I thought it was, you know, a better album. In fact, I'm kind of surprised I don't own it here. I've got it on blank tape. I used to listen to it all the time. In fact, I'll keep this going on RATT so we can get to the next song, which is off of Reach for the Sky. But then they did Detonator in '90, and it's just weird to talk about hair metal in the '90s, even if it is 1990, and I know it was still going pretty strong in '90. But I would say Detonator's, it's probably my least favorite of this era of the band, only because I'm not that familiar with it. And plus these song titles, you know, if I can even read them. Giving Yourself Away, One Step Away, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. I mean, Shake, Shake, Shake. Loving You's a Dirty Job. You know, it just got a little like they didn't know what else to do at some point. But I don't know if anybody recognizes this deep cut. It's called No Surprise. It's on the second side of Reach for the Sky. So I would have to say that Detonator would be my least favorite. Dancing Undercover would be fourth. Reach for the Sky, guess third. I'd probably put Invasion second. Out of the Cellar number 1. And that EP's pretty good. That goes back to '83. And again, Jakey Lee was in the band in the very beginning. They were called Mickey RATT, and they were in San Diego. Got up to the Sunset Strip in time to break out pretty early on. So, yeah, RATT, I do dig. This is like the Lay It Down song for this album. Warren even drops in a cool solo very similar to. But so there you go. That's talking about another classic Sunset Strip band from the '80s, all over MTV. A band of my youth. I mean, I think I heard them when I was 7, 8. Definitely by the time I was 8, I was digging these bands. That's pretty young, you know. But so yeah, just classic stuff here. All that stuff. And yeah, I followed them up through Reach for the Sky pretty regularly, and then later on I got this and got a little more familiar with the EP and Detonator. But I pretty much cut my teeth on Out of the Cellar, Invasion of Your Privacy, Dancing Undercover, Reach for the Sky. Those 4. So there you go. That is covering another classic hair metal band from the 80s, RATT. And so with that, we will be right back with our third band of the night. Welcome back. One final band for tonight for the hair metal episode, or whatever I'm going to call this. The Halloween hair metal 3-pack radio giant, MTV giant, all that stuff. And we've got DOKKEN. DOKKEN, another band from the Sunset Strip. Their first album, Breaking the Chains, came out in '81 on some like Japanese label. But for some reason, the version I had as a kid came out in '83, and it does sound, when you listen to this album, Tooth and Nail, from '84, it sounds like a huge leap forward. And that's because the Breaking the Chains album, for the most part, is already 3 years old. But another early band of the scene. You know, Breaking the Chains, that was all done in '81. The album I had said '83, but it was '81. And the song Breaking the Chains is great. The rest of that album is, I don't know, it's not bad, but this is where they really start kicking butt, is on Tooth and Nail. And if you watch the videos, they're kind of got that hair metal thing going, but they have not gotten to full-fledged, you know, pink spandex looking like women yet. They're still a little rough with jean jackets and stuff. And George Lynch looks like he's in Kaja Gugu or something like that. But this album is metal. You know, Tooth and Nail, When Heaven Comes Down. You know, it does have Into the Fire. But Alone Again's a cool ballad, but it's a ballad. And again, you know, earlier I was saying that, you know, Mick Mars is a good guitar player. Warren DeMartini's a killer guitar player. George Lynch is an absolute stud on guitars. I mean, he's the reason I listen to DOKKEN. Like, some of these lyrics are pretty cheesy, but man, the guitar playing is always great. And I think we're going to hear a solo here from '84. So Tooth and Nail, definitely total metal at this point in their career. And I don't think they ever weren't metal. That's the thing. They were definitely, of these three bands that we're talking about, they were definitely the most metal. You know, they're doing, well, I'll just talk about their trajectory here. And I've got it on cassette. Next they do Under Lock and Key in '85. What did I say about 1985? Look at the dramatic change in look. Their hair, everything. They're starting to wear all that makeup or whatever, and the hair is all crazy. Not that, you know, not crazy like mine, but they just changed their look. But the thing is, these songs are still excellent. I don't know if you can see that photo. There's another look of '85. I feel like '85 was the breakout year for hair metal. Yeah, The Hunter, In My Dreams, It's Not Love. You know, Will the Sun Rise? I don't think anybody talks about that track. It's my favorite deep cut on here. I think this album is great. I think their look initially would turn you away a little bit. But man, I think just George Lynch, I think they write good songs, and I think George just carries the entire album. I mean, not that Jeff Pilson can't play bass, and not that Mick Brown can't lay down a big fat 80s beat, and not that Don Dokken can't sing. He can totally sing, but just, yeah, It's Not Love from this album. And then one of my all-time favorites, the next album in '87, Back for the Attack. Back for the Attack. My favorite Dokken album. They, you know, had a song or a few. You know, this was based around Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, so it kind of has like a scary movie Halloween type vibe to it. It's kind of a darker album, but still good. Yeah, I just want to air guitar to these Dokken riffs. But man, this album, just the guitar tone from George. Kiss of Death, Prisoner, Night by Night, Standing in the Shadows, Heaven Sent. There was a video, they were like in a graveyard in like New Orleans or something. Mr. Scary, great instrumental. The video for this, they're like on a flatbed of a truck or something, driving down the streets of Los Angeles, just playing on a moving truck. through downtown LA. It's just so classic hair metal Sunset Strip. So many tears, Burning Like a Flame. There's a video for that. Lost Behind the Wall, great deep cut. Stop Fighting Love, Cry of the Gypsy, Sleepless Night, and Dream Warriors. That was Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Great album. You know, I used to have Breaking the Chains. I guess I sold it at some point because I was like, I have Beast for the East, double live, but it had Breaking the Chains on here. I'm like, well, I got the one song I like from that album live. And get the vinyl, not the CD. The CD omits like 3 tracks. But listen to these tracks: Unchain the Night, Tooth and Nail, Standing in the Shadows, Sleepless Night, Dream Warriors, Kiss of Death, When Heaven Comes Down, we heard earlier, Into the Fire, Mr. Scary, Heaven Sent, It's Not Love, Alone Again, Just Got Lucky, Breaking the Chains, In My Dreams, Turn on the Action, and a new studio track, Walk Away. And unfortunately, after this album, at the peak of hair metal, they broke up. I don't know what's going on with Don Dokken and those guys, but why would you break up? You're peaking, it's 88. Ride it out for another 2 or 3, like ride it out for another 3 years. But no, they couldn't do it. So I know they've since reformed. Red Beach was in the band for a period of time. I've not listened to really anything they've done since. So really, my focus is those, you know, that 83 to 88. It's really 81 to 88, and it's really Tooth and Nail, Under Lock and Key, and definitely Back for the Attack. And then I like Beast from the East because it has a new song, but it also has Breaking the Chains on here. So that's kind of my listening for Dokken, is, you know, these 80s albums. But yeah, they were a killer band. I'm sure they're still doing good stuff. There's just so much music to listen to, and I rarely see that George is involved with the band. I know that Reb's a great guitarist too, but I think the band just isn't the same without, you know, Don and George at the helm. And I'm trying to extend this long enough so we can at least get to the opening riff of the next song before I fade it out. But just talking about 3 Sunset Strip bands that got their foot in the door really early. Like I said, you know, Dokken had the album in 81 on a Japanese label that got picked up for everyone in 83, which is when it really started to get going. Motley Crue has Shout at the Devil in 83, and suddenly that Too Fast for Love album from 81, it gets picked up on Elektra by 82. You know, RATT is kicking around. They do an EP that kind of gets them jump-started, and they get in 84. But by 85, all these bands were rolling, and they had all changed that look from sort of that rougher jean jacket image to just complete the hair metal, the spandex, the glam, the poofy hair, all those things. And for my money, these were my 3 favorite bands just because of the guitars. I think the songwriting was better, and I think these bands were literally, they weren't glam rock necessarily, they actually were metal. You know, Dokken is definitely a metal band. I think RATT, when they're on, are metal. I think Motley Crue was certainly metal in the early days. And but so there you go. I just wanted to get these guys covered. I think I've talked about a few bands in this sort of genre before, but not the Sunset Strip. And I thought, what better time to do it than on the Halloween episode, so I could get all dressed up for this. So there you go. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.